My name's Ian Allison, and I did my project on technology in schools. I'm going to start off with a little history of how things began. One of the first big inventions was the tablet and stylus, and those came around in Sumerian times, so about 3000 BC. Now, those tablets were usually either clay or slate, and there was some sort of metal stylus. Common ones were lead or silver, and those tablets could be cleaned with water and reused, or in the case of clay tablets, if you wanted to keep the information, they could be fired and saved. Now, that was updated with lead pencils, which are really graphite pencils, and that was around 1560. There was never really any lead in them. And initially, they were made from a solid graphite that's only really found in Cumberland, England. Now, there were other mixtures of graphite that were used, but they weren't nearly the same quality, up until a man named Nicolas Jacques Conti, who made a mixture of graphite and clay in 1795, and that's really the basis of what we still use today. Now, after that came the hornbook, and that was really a piece of wood with a piece of paper that was treated to be protected from the elements on it. It's that picture in the bottom left there. And the hornbook didn't really have all that much information on it, but it would have a little bit of grammar lessons like letters and vowels, as well as some religious texts like the Lord's Prayer or an expression of the Holy Trinity. Now, after that, the next major real improvement in that line of technology would have been the ballpoint pen, and that was around 1940. And since then, now the next big step really is the iPads and tablets that have come out in the last decade or so that have really made that a lot more advanced than it was before. Now, another ancient technology was the abacus. It's basically an early level calculator. It came around the same time as the tablet and stylus. Now, it's been used for a long time, and it actually, even up till recent times, was still used. My mother was born in 1957, and she was taught how to use an abacus in school. They did also have the slide rule, which was another version of a basically handheld sort of calculator. It involved two rulers sliding back and forth. Came around like 1654. Now, following the line of computers, the next real major invention was kind of surprising. It's called the Jacquard loom. It's the one in the bottom right over there. And really, it wasn't so much a computer as the first form of programming used. They would use basically little cards to tell the loom what to do. It wasn't really a computer so much as it was follow the pattern that was built in the cards, which in early computers was how they taught computers what to do things rather than writing programs. They would put in cards with punch holes and that would tell the computer what to do. Now, the first real calculating computer was built in 1822. It's that picture in the bottom middle there. And advancing from that was the typewriter. Came out in 1873. And for the typewriter, there wasn't a lot of ways to fix mistakes until whiteout or liquid paper came out in the 1960s. But it was still very useful for typing, and writing things could be done a lot faster. Now, the handheld calculator didn't really come around until 1972, and they've definitely advanced a lot from when they first came out of just doing addition, multiplication, subtraction, stuff like that. I had a graphing calculator in high school that could calculate and draw graphs in 3D, which was pretty cool. Although the price of that calculator is the same as when I bought it 10 years ago, so I don't know if it's advancing anymore. Now, the first real modern sort of computer came out in 1975, and the first portable version of that came out in 1981, and obviously pretty much everyone in our class has a laptop now, so that's definitely advanced a lot. Now, the next big milestone in education was a blackboard. Now, up until 1801, there wasn't really any sort of board for the teachers to write on. They would go around to the students and write on their stylus as problems they had to do. And it seems kind of obvious now, but the first guy who really made a blackboard by just basically hanging a giant piece of slate in the front of the classroom was a man named James Pillins from Edinburgh, Scotland. And in America, the first guy was George Barron. It was about 1840-ish. Now, blackboards were made of slate and just used chalk and stuff like that. And now, they were updated with chalkboards, which honestly, up until recently, I thought were basically the same thing but different names. But chalkboards are actually lighter, more durable, easier to move around, and they're made with a steel plate and a paint enamel, porcelain-based enamel over them. And now these are the green or blue chalkboards you see in classrooms a lot now, modern days. And one of the big advantages, besides, of course, the lightness and the durability, is the fact when you clean them, they get a lot cleaner. Like if you notice this fake chalkboard background I made for my PowerPoint has a lot of chalk dust on it, and that doesn't happen as much with the chalkboards. Now, the dry erase whiteboards came out in about the 1980s, and those are also being advanced into more interactive whiteboards nowadays. Now, another big improvement in education was the Magic Lantern, which is really an early projector. It was mostly used in theaters and homes, but when it first came out in the 1640s, but it was still used in classrooms. And that wasn't really updated until stereoscopes, which are those little, that picture in the middle right over there, where you look through and you can see a picture in 3D, or the film projector, which is the bottom left, and developed into the overhead projector as well, which of course we all remember those. Also, videotapes came out in 1951, which made it a little bit easier for showing films as well as DVDs in mid-90s. Now, the next major milestone would be the mimeograph, which is basically an early not really handheld, I guess, but hand-cranked printer. So it'd print classroom materials and make administrative documents a little bit easier, and that was made automatic with a photocopier in the 1950s. Now, the Scantron tests that we all remember came out in the 1970s. Those were a big advancement, made it much easier for teachers to grade a lot of tests really fast. Probably got used a little bit too much, but definitely very useful in school. And another big invention was the internet, which was technically around in the 70s, but it wasn't really public until 1989, which is why I put that date on there. And after that were PDAs, which not really a lot of students have necessarily even had then, but they were basically a predecessor to smartphones, which I'm pretty sure everyone in the class has, and that's why the number it says, the article I read said that 50% of college students have one, but I would believe that number is probably more closer to 80%, even though that article was only written 2 or 3 years ago. And because we all use it, I just thought I'd put in that Moodle came out in 2002. So now, where is this technology going? Now, some of this is currently being used or implemented, but it has places to go. YouTube is a very common thing, and personally, there's a lot of educational videos on YouTube, and the ones I've listed there, which are CPG Grey, Smarter Every Day, and Veritasium, are 3 of those educational channels that I actually follow myself and very much enjoy, do very great work. Also, social media isn't necessarily the most commonly seen technology for education, but it does allow teachers to connect with each other outside of class as well as communicate with students easier, and students themselves can communicate about the class assignments and stuff and make it a little easier to work outside of the classroom. Now, some of the more actual future things would be biometrics, which seems maybe a little odd at first thought, but what it can do is it can adjust the materials to learn individual needs. So we can look at an individual's mind and see how they think and adjust their education based on what they need. And that's way in the future necessarily, but it is heading that direction. And it also leads into some of the thought that's been going on in sports lately, where splitting people up by age isn't always the best, as people mature at different rates, and biometrics can help determine which people are at the same level of maturity for education as well as sports. Now, another big technology that's being developed right now that's being used in schools is augmented or virtual reality. Now, augmented reality is when you have glasses, you can project basically something onto the world around you. You see the world around you as well as a projection. Very useful for visualizing 3D graphs, kind of like the picture in the top right, but eventually onto glasses rather than a tablet. It also just helps you visualize what's going on while you're doing things and actually see what you're doing at the same time. Now, virtual reality can be used for classrooms to have that in-class experience even when you're not in class together. Another technology that's going to be very useful in schools would be multi-surface interactive desks, kind of like the picture in the bottom right there. You might have seen some, I've seen them at a mall before, where you can just kind of play games on them. But of course, they could definitely be useful for an in-class scenario when there are some things you can't actually bring into class, but with a interactive desk you can. Another big development for education is video games. Now, there are educationally geared video games that are specifically designed towards education. One of the specific ones I remember playing when I was younger is Clue Finders, which are those two pictures on the top there, which basically you'd solve math problems or grammar problems and try to help them solve whatever problem they were dealing with. And they were geared for specific grades. That one obviously is the third grade one. There's also other video games that help develop thinking habits, like Portal series is a very problem-solving puzzle game. There's SimCity, which helps with management and environmental conditions and planning things. There's also Civilization, which, besides having the strategy as well as the managing a civilization access to it, there in Civilization you can actually read about the different civilizations that you are playing, and while they may obviously not play out like they did in actual history, you can at least read about it and see what did actually happen. Another big game that's getting big into the education section is Minecraft, which seems kind of odd at first thought, but there's an update coming out with Minecraft specifically that's very education focused. It should be coming out actually within the next month, and it's those two pictures on the right. They've actually added chemistry, so you can, as a class, bring the chemistry up and visualize putting in protons, neutrons, and electrons to create atoms and elements. As well as some of the other stuff is that there is some programming involved in the game itself where you can teach basic programming using the energy mechanic in the game, as well as the creativity of being able to build whatever you want in the game. Now, some of the concerns with the development of technology out there is that it's making tasks too easy for people, and honestly this has been a concern with basically every big technology that's come out. With calculators, there was the worry that people wouldn't be able to add and subtract anymore. They would just rely on the calculator and they would forget how to do the basics. As well as with the internet now, with the ease of access to information, students may not be as interested in learning the information if they can access it so easily, and there's actually studies that show that students will pay more attention if they know they can't get the access to the information later. Now, at the same time with that ease of access, there are some theories that say that easing up the simple parts allows us to develop our mind further, but that's one of those things that's really kind of hard to prove one way or the other. And another big argument against the improvement in technology is that a lot of the classroom improvement shown through studies has less to do with the actual technology used and more to do with the quality of the teacher teaching the information. Now, students necessarily themselves enjoy the technology, but it may not actually help them as much, other than maybe increase their motivation and interest. There are also the issues with screen time causing attention problems, sleep issues, and eating disorders. And that's pretty much it, and these are my sources, so I hope you enjoyed.